How's it going, people? Welcome back to Casual Gamer Reviews. Today I will be looking at the indie game Eternal Strands, developed by Yellow Brick Games. This is the devs' first title, but they are composed of industry veterans, and you can definitely tell in certain aspects of this game. Don't forget to smash that like and subscribe button if you enjoy this video and want to see more of this content. I put 29 hours into this game, and I'm pretty sure I completed all quests. The only things still remaining were the collectibles. Reviewed on Xbox Series X. Eternal Strands weaves several games together into one title. That weaving pun will mean more to you when you play the game, trust me. It's a good one. You see basic third-person action with melee weapons and bows. You have access to a dodge roll and a block parry when using a shield. You can also destroy pretty much anything in this game. Almost everything will crumble if you hack at it enough. In addition to this, there is a full-scale resource management system, a focus on elemental magics with reactive effects, a weather system, colossi monsters, and of course, you can climb absolutely anything. While it sounds great on paper to offer the players this much different stuff, Eternal Strands actually suffers to do any of them really well. Some mechanics were well implemented, better than others for sure, but my honest opinion is that it did not need to include all of them. The combat for the most part is very enjoyable and probably where this game excels. This is due heavily to the elemental powers Bryn, the playable character, wields. Melee weapons fall into two types, sword and board or two-handers. Then there is also an option for a bow if you so please. Personally, I found the bows completely useless as most enemies rush you in this game. All three of these weapon types come in elemental forms as well. Sticking with this numerical fashion, there are also three elemental types: fire, ice, and kinetic. If you wield a weapon with an elemental stat, it will have a special move that will utilize its configuration. As I just said, I found the bows to be useless, but the sword and board and two-handers each had their own pros and cons. With the sword and shield, you could block and parry more effectively, as well as having quicker attacks. For the two-handers, they are slower of course, but deal significantly more damage. I found by the end I was favoring the two-handers, but that is more because of the path this game pushes you when it comes to combat. The smaller, menial enemies were easier to fight with sword and board, but the colossal boss enemies were more effectively dispatched with the larger weapon. Fire, ice, and kinetic magics aren't just elements baked into your weapons, but also spells you can use. Bryn is a member of a weaver band, and a big part of their nature is their ability to draw magic through their mantle, which is effectively a cloth worn on their armor. The magics were easily my favorite part of this game, and each element had three different spells. There's that special number again. The reactivity of the spells were very impressive, and you can tell it was a focus for this dev team. When you use a fire spell, everything flammable will go up in flames, whether that be plants, wooden structures, or even fur on monsters. Similarly with ice, you could freeze an enemy in place. Perhaps you ice a creature's wing and it can no longer fly. Maybe you ice an Archon's leg and it falls to its knees. My favorite was freezing shut a dragon's mouth when it was about to breathe fire, and then for it to explode on itself. These spells would even have reactivity with each other, so ice would put out fire or cool an area, and fire would melt ice or heat up an area. It was through these systems that I found most enjoyment with this game. The kinetic spells were reactive as well in their own way, as you could pick up or suck in almost any object or enemy in the environment. The most use I found with the kinetic spells though was the ability to pick up an enemy and just launch them off the map, because oh my god does this game unnecessarily throw too many enemies at you. The basic enemies have very low variety, which is completely understandable for an indie studio, but please do not have them swarm me every 2 seconds. Not to mention their draw distance is disgustingly big. The amount of times I had an enemy leap the length of the fucking Milky Way to whack me on the head was countless. The enemies are fun to fight at first, but once you're past the initial 10 hours and are continuing to fight the same things, it does get extremely tedious. Breaking the tedium of the basic enemies are the colossal beasts, and where this game gets its Monster Hunter vibes. There are 9 of these enemies you can run into, and after the first encounter they can appear in any area. Much like everything else in this game, these beasts wield one of the 3 elemental powers, and it is an even 3-way split. To defeat these behemoths you must take a different approach, and every single one requires scaling them Shadow of the Colossus style. You can either deplete the health bar down to 0, in which the only result will be rare resources for crafting, or you can do the much more preferable harvest. Harvesting a colossal monster requires first learning how to do so. And yes, you could look up a guide, but the game also tells you how to do it if you want to lean into the lore a bit. Once you encounter one of these monsters for the first time and defeat it or are defeated by it, you will get a codex entry. You can study this codex entry to discover written lore of historical encounters with it. Within these texts, you can also see a secret way to harvest. This could be climbing around the body and hacking the armor off. Maybe it requires you smashing the horns on its head. Perhaps you need to burn the fur off its body. Some of the more complex ones will require you to do multiple things. The puzzle and climbing aspects of these fights really made them enjoyable and fresh every single time. Once you have completed a successful harvest, you get an elemental strand that mirrors the element of the monster you felled. This can be then woven into your mantle to enhance one of your powers. Each monster is tied to one of your unique spells, and each spell can be enhanced to, you guessed it, level 3. This means you need to harvest each of these 9 colossal beasts 3 times, and trust me, every single time is as enjoyable as the last. It can be janky at times, and you will whiff hits. You will clip through animations. You will sometimes teleport into the enemy's grab attack, and yes, these were all annoying, but not enough to take the fun out of the game. However, definitely worth mentioning. A very important mechanic is the resource system. Everything that you break, every treasure chest you find, and every defeated enemy will drop resources. These work on a 5-star system, with 1-star being common and 5-star being legendary. Around the different levels you can find blueprints of items, and these can be armor split into headwear, breastplates, gloves, and greaves, or one of the 3 weapon types I mentioned earlier. You need core resources to craft these items, but the higher the rank your resources are, the stronger the gear will be. This isn't the be-all end-all though, as you can reforge any item you have crafted to replace any resource used in its original make with a more advanced one. This was my favorite part of the crafting system, as it meant I could constantly upgrade my gear as I got further in the game without having to make new ones. You can also upgrade through the normal sense, which is just a numbers go up procedure. As this game is so driven by the resources, there are some other aspects they affect. Resources can be broken down into camp supplies that are used to upgrade stations. You can upgrade the station that gives you stronger powers, or upgrade the forge to be able to craft stronger equipment. You should also definitely consider upgrading the caravan, which allows you to hold more resources when you are out on an expedition. The more you can bring back, the more you will benefit by far. Later in the story, you unlock the ability to buy any resources you want so you can craft that gear that may have been eluding you. The way the game actually plays out is that the party camp acts as your central hub area. You can then go out on an expedition to different areas to gather resources, complete quests, or fell the colossal beasts. The day is split into 3 time periods: morning, day, and night. The enemy placements and types, including the colossal monsters, vary depending on what time of day it is. There are also different weathers that can appear in an area, and each have their own effects. For example, if there is a drought, things will catch fire more quickly. Or if there is a miasma, it means there will be damaging magical energy lingering all over the map. Certain colossal beasts are easier to fight during certain weathers, so this should be capitalized on, but it also works the other way. Much later in the game, you gain the ability to change the weather, but it was too late at that point to be worth my time. Visually, Eternal Strands can be very stylized with a massive splash of color, but also can be very unimpressive. The character portraits are very good, and whenever engaging in dialogue, these portraits will pop up. The cutscenes are very beautifully made when in 2D, but in 3D are very difficult to appreciate due to the constant clipping of assets and the lip sync just not existing. The art style of the environments and the design of the enemies are very reminiscent of Ubisoft's Immortals Phoenix Rising. It has this blocky 3D cartoon look, and while I was impressed with all of the colossal monsters and the main character Bryn, I was not impressed with the models of any of the other characters or enemies, as they were largely uninspired. None of the armors particularly grabbed my attention, but some of the weapons, especially the two-handed ones, looked really cool. The design of some of the assets were incredible though. The whole game has the narrative of threads weaving into one another, and you can see that idea incorporated into a lot of the objects. The loom gates being the first one, which looked amazing. These were fast travel points but had these golden strands threading through the large archway that made something so menial very attractive to look at. Then there's the scry, which is a tool used by the weaver band to watch Brynn when she's out on her expeditions. It looks almost like a horizontal harp sparkling in all its golden glory. The game ran well 80% of the time, but I did have noticeable frame dips when fighting bigger enemies or when there was a lot of elemental effects happening on screen at once. I even had a full-on slideshow happening when I fought the final boss and I had to restart. The collision detection can be really bad at some points, but this can also work in your favor, so I won't complain about it too much. The music in Eternal Strands is very much on a higher level than you would expect from a fantasy game. Austin Wintory, a BAFTA-winning composer, is behind this OST. The soundtrack contains a lot of string instruments, which I thought was very fitting to the Strands narrative. The peaceful vibes that were echoing out when in the hub areas were my absolute favorite. It felt like you were huddled around a campfire and sinking into the most relaxing state of mind. The voice acting is also stellar and consists of some familiar names. My standouts were Casmin, voiced by Rebecca Hansen of Stellar Blade fame, Lane, voiced by Robin Holdaway, and Brynn, voiced by May Mack. A fun bit of trivia, I actually saw May Mack performing in My Neighbor Totoro on stage just last year and she killed it, much like I think she does in this game as the protagonist. Narratively, Eternal Strands follows the story of a ragtag group of weavers. Weavers are magic-wielding outcasts who are always on the road. In this game's lore, the origin of the weavers and the center of past magic is called the Enclave. A historical, catastrophic event sealed the Enclave behind a veil, and now this weaver band have come to find their cultural home. Brynn and her team must find out what really happened to cause the veil to be raised and what threat lurks at the heart of the Enclave. There are some sacrifices, some betrayals, and a lot of team spirit throughout this game's fairly lengthy runtime. There is a lot of well-written character relationships, as well as a fair share of emotionally intelligent writing, both of which are right up my street. Unfortunately, the way the side quests play out does overshadow this a bit, which brings us to side content. There is a nice amount of side quests in this game. Each character has their own development quest, and due to the writing that I just mentioned, I wanted to engage with them all. However, Eternal Strands has limited areas to explore and it rushes through them so quickly with the story that each of these side quests feel very monotonous as they constantly require you to return to previously visited areas to find some menial item. It is such a shame that these strong scripts are worn down by this frankly boring element. Outside of the side quests, there are codex entries and the armor or weapon blueprints. There are well over 100 of these, with the codex entries servicing the rich lore this game has, and the blueprints servicing your combat prowess. Eternal Strands takes many elements from great games and tries its best to fashion them together, but in reality I think it would have benefited from having a smaller scope. The things it does so well are without a doubt the elemental powers with their fun reactive nature, as well as the colossal beasts. The resource system and basic enemies could have had some finer tuning. The exploration for the most part is not fun, as nobody really feels rewarded when opening a chest that is filled with only resources. Not to mention the constant backtracking you have to do if you want to pursue the side quests. The OST, voice acting, and writing are all very strong, and so I would definitely look out for the studio's next title, but all in all, not a bad first step for this team. Eternal Strands gets a casual gamer score of 7 out of 10. Let me know what you thought of this game, or if you want to give it a try in the comments below. If you enjoy this content, please consider leaving a like and subscribe, and for everything casual gamer, keep it here. Peace and love.